Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I like. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. This episode of Elementary picked up pretty much right after last week's episode, where we have that guy that Joan had spying on Moreland, Emil. Basically, his murder, Joan goes there and she's like flipping out, and she's asking all these questions like, oh, was it possible this guy might have been the main target? Like, there might have been a main target or whatever. And then he's like, and, it gets Sherlock questioning her, and then, she kind of spills the beans. I really like the fact is how he went off on her. It wasn't just a calm conversation. He went off on her. He's like, you're idiotic. I told you how dangerous my father is, and you do something like that, and you do it without telling me. But I can't understand her slight justification. Because she wanted to kind of get all the facts, first before bringing him in. Because, when it comes to his dad, it kind of gets brought up multiple times in this episode. Like, the way he's very emotional when it comes to his dad. He kind of doesn't handle things like how he typically would handle things because his dad's involved. But he's just like, it's still like, it was a little stupid. It was dangerous for her to do that because he is a very dangerous man. Turns out, though, he isn't the killer, though. Like, it did lead to a lot of interesting things. You see him he kind of brings up to his dad's like, oh, this guy Emil's dead, and wants to see how his dad reacted. But his dad's reaction, kind of that look on his face, was kind of like, he didn't do it. That's what kind of told me, I was like, it's going to turn out that he didn't do it, right? And sadly, he didn't. It even led to an interesting conversation between him and Gregson, because Gregson was trying to fill him out, and he's like, do you think I'm a killer? He's like, yeah. I mean, not really, yeah, but just like, he's like, oh, you've been talking to Sherlock. Sherlock kind of paints me as a monster. He's like, Sherlock has his imagination and wants to paint me as a monster. And then Gregson defends it, but like, well, Sherlock is a very smart guy. He's one of the smartest people that Gregson knows. So it's like, he trusts Sherlock's judgment. So Sherlock's like, yeah, my dad's a bit of a monster. It's like, kind of is. But I mean, that really surprised me because honestly, it never crossed my mind until I started seeing that beginning part. It never crossed my mind, like, maybe Moreland didn't do it. Because the moment it happened, I was like, I didn't see Moreland did it. It was as simple as that. I mean, they wanted to paint it that way anyway, but it's very interesting. It's like, never once did it cross my mind last week to be like, oh yeah, it's possible someone else did it. It never crossed my mind. I was like 100% certain Moreland did it. So, I'm granted not himself. Makes you wonder, has he ever gotten his hands dirty personally? But it's like, okay. But, obviously that he hired someone. End up finding out, end up tracking down the killer, the guy who killed Emil. Turns out he was kind of a paid hitman, and he'd actually killed someone before as like a psychologist. What really was trippy in this episode was finding out, piecing everything together. You have that psychiatrist. I totally blanked on this. I'm going to go back to it. But going back to Gregson and Moreland thing really quickly, I really like the fact is that he threatened his, like, Sherlock and Watson kind of getting mixed up and stuff with you. If something happens to them, they get hurt or whatever, I'm gonna come back to you, and it won't be as a cop. I'm like, wow, look at him being very protective because they're very close to him. They're close friends, and it's like, and I guess that's kind of why Sherlock always bonded. Thanks to Captain Gregson as a good friend, is because probably in his eyes, Captain Gregson is like the dad he never had. Well, I mean, he had, but it still stands because it even came up because Gregson's like, "Are you sure? Are you okay about talking about your dad like this?" He's like, "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" He's like, "No, just like," he's like, "Oh, you think it's typically a normal person who has a relationship with their dad, it'd be like, oh, a little upset about claiming their father to be a killer or whatever." It's like, no, you won't get that from me. But going back to it, you end up finding out that basically the psychologist had made like a survey that basically she was trying to depict, like how people viewed crimes. Which crimes are like, if you murdered someone as a crime of passion, was it the same? Should you say to serve the same amount of time as a pedophile? Stuff like that. Like, what crimes do people believe are worse and what are, which crimes deserve more time than others, stuff like that, just people's opinions. Someone was basically, you end up finding out is her assistant was taking those tests, the surveys that people were doing, and basically kind of reverse engineering them and making it so that they depicted people with psychopathic tendencies, lack of empathy specifically. So hire people who would be willing to murder people. And it's like, there's actually, we've only met like, I think it was like, wasn't it like two in this episode or something like that they talked about, but they were tracking down altogether. There were six particular people, and the reason why she got involved is because she got met by someone who had a fake CIA badge. In that moment, I was like, oh, it is Moreland. Even after all this BS, it totally is Moreland. No, because you end up finding out that Sherlock, I still didn't really understand what he was saying, but basically the name that was given, Sherlock tied it back and said, like, Moriarty was involved. I got up, I was like, what? Moriarty? Yes, that's awesomeness, because I love Moriarty's character. I love that, because that Irene Adler aspect to it, to me, that twist was like, that's one of my favorite storylines in Elementary, is that twist that Irene Adler and Jamie Moriarty are the same person. There is a part of my brain that's always wondering, like, is it going to be a fake out, because they kind of did a similar thing like that, possibly in Sherlock, the BBC show Sherlock, because sadly, I only watched up to the end of season 2. I watched like the first half of season 3's first episode. So, but I didn't know if that, like, Moriarty you met there was the real Moriarty, that was fake. I don't know. But it does make me wonder, like, sometimes, what if she's just in a position, what if she's being forced into a position where she's like, I'm not really Moriarty, I'm actually just Irene Adler, but I'm forced to be in this position. But it's like, nah, some of the stuff she's done, because I recently randomly came across the episode on TV one time. It's the episode where Moriarty killed that lady. It's a lady that Sherlock and Watson got arrested, and basically she was trying to kill Joan, but she ended up killing her boyfriend. Was it Adam, that she was dating at the time? I think that was his name. And basically Moriarty, because she likes Jones, killed because she liked Joan. I think I just called her Joan, because she likes Joan, she killed a woman, had her killed in prison. I was like, wow. So it's like, but I really like that, because I brought it up a couple episodes ago. It's like, I would love, I was like, I think it's an episode called Ready or Not. It was basically Sherlock dealing with his new girlfriend in his life. And it was like, I brought it up. I was like, it'd be interesting if Moriarty came back, because like, you don't see her that often, so she doesn't come up that often. It just most likely, a main probably reason for that is probably because Natalie Dormer, the actress who plays her, lovely lady. I mean, personally, I've never met her, but she seems like a lovely lady. Probably full schedule, so maybe that's. But hopefully, we get to see her next episode, because apparently she's behind all these like murders. She's like the one who, essentially, it was like her organization specifically that Sherlock tied it to, and it's just like, that means maybe we're going to get her next episode. I hope so. A really interesting thing that came up in this episode that I really like, because I do apologize, I have been yammering on, but I'm going to get back to it, is finding out that I thought was total horse crap what Moreland did last episode, busting into the Sherlock and Watson's place. And he said it was looking for something. I was like, oh, that's total BS. And he brought it up this episode too. It's apparently a specific ring, but even Sherlock was like, no, I haven't seen it. But we end up seeing, he pulls it out of the fireplace. That ring, what he was looking for was a ring that it belonged to his mom. And Sherlock, he found it when he first moved into the place, I think, is what he said, and he hid it away. He's like, at first he was kind of like, oh yeah, like, it's interesting that, he's like, for a second I wanted to believe my dad had wanted it for sympathetic reasons, but then he's like, no, my dad's most likely going to use. Then he's like realizing, it's like, no, my dad wants it because he's going to sell it. He brought it here to New York just in case he ever ran into a situation where he needed, money fast. So basically that the ring was going to be traded as, information on adversaries or whatever. Because that's what this whole thing was about. Essentially, Emil got killed because of his, because he was possibly killed because of him, working as a mole in Moreland's organization, the oil company group or whatever that hired him to spy on Moreland. That they might have possibly been behind those murders or whatever. It was like a bunch of kind of domino effects stuff leading to that. But it was just kind of like sad. He was just like, it's something, probably one of the few remaining things he has of his mother. It's very interesting because this season is something like his mom has been brought up in conversation quite a bit. It's not something he's rarely talked about in the past. This is like the first season we've ever dived into it. But granted, this is the first time, his dad being in close proximity to him in years. So it's kind of like, it kind of makes sense it would come up now. But it's just like, Watson was like, what are you going to do? Are you going to give it to him? And Sherlock's like, no, my dad can find other revenue means. It's like, I'm keeping, he keeps the ring. And he kind of admits to Joan, because I forgot he never actually told her what he had learned from his dad about his mom being into drugs. And, it kind of came up multiple times during this episode, kind of like, regretting being born, from his dad sharing the same DNA. To me, I kept interpreting it, because, granted, he meant it different ways, but probably a completely different way, but I constantly kept interpreting it because he was like, he doesn't blame his mom for like, him being, having his drug issues. He's not trying to blame her or for that or whatever, whatever her proclivities were, those were hers, and that's not his fault. That's not her fault for it being on him, even though it might be like a genetic thing. But it's like, to me, I always kept getting the impression he's like, personally, I feel like he's afraid that one day he will become his dad because, him and his dad, obviously are related. So it's like part of his dad's DNA is ingrained in his. So it's like, I feel like on some level, Sherlock is afraid he'll end up like his dad one day. So, which when you see the way Moreland is, it's kind of like, I don't know. You kind of understand, you kind of, it's like, yeah, I wouldn't want to be that man either. I did like it, interestingly enough, when like Sherlock was like, yeah, his dad wasn't behind it. And his dad was like, it almost sounded like an apology. Like Sherlock had a look of contempt on his face. Like, what really? You think I'm going to apologize to you? He's like, yeah, you might not have committed this murder. It doesn't change who you are as a person. It's the kind of the evil man that you are. So I really like this episode. That ring thing really got to me. It's just like, holy crap. Interesting thing, I just couldn't help but notice it. This episode was directed by Lucy Liu. I thought it was I always like that. I always notice that the most when the actors in a show direct the episode. I'm just like, oh, that's so awesome. I know it's like a weird thing to point out, but it's just one of those things I notice. But I am really curious to see what goes down next episode. Like, are we going to see Moriarty? Are we going to just deal with people connected to Moriarty? What's going to go down? But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.